All right, so obviously I'm not in class today. The reason I'm out is my son's still not doing well. We were at the hospital at the end of last week. Um, we just have a follow up today, so with the pediatrician. So I'm out today, but I didn't want to waste the day, and I didn't want to give you busy work. So what I'm doing is recording some notes to help you. It may be in two videos broken apart. But here's the first one. So you have the notes. You have blank slides that go along with this. I definitely want you to write down what I'm writing, but I want you to also write down what I'm saying for each of these, so that the notes may actually make sense to you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So here's the background. We have to know about Gregor Mendel. You've learned about him before, so let's just very quickly talk about what his role is. Let me get my pointer. I don't want red. But I'll take that blue. Okay, so he's recognized as the father of genetics. Although what we know about genetics has moved far beyond what Gregor Mendel knew, but we do know that he was an Austrian monk who lived in the 19th century, which is the 1800s. He actually did a lot of his work in the 1860s, which is the same time as Charles Darwin, who gave us the theory of evolution by natural selection. So, if we're talking about survival of the fittest, meaning those individuals that are best suited for the environment, passing down their traits to future generations, very clearly that is related to genetics. But Mendel and Darwin didn't see that connection. And so, in fact, they did not even. Mendel had sent things to Darwin, but Darwin never opened them or read them because he didn't see the connection. It wasn't until the 1930s that biologists made a clear connection between genetics and evolution. But Mendel, you might remember, worked on peas. And here, I want you to circle this. This is the scientific name. I know this is hard to see. The scientific name of the peas, and if you remember that it's in Latin, this first word is capitalized, the second word is not. It's written in italics, or it could be underlined. And this is the genus, and this is the species name. That's binomial nomenclature, and it was Linnaeus who gave us that naming convention. But his peas were true breeding, which means, I lost my cursor here, which means that they were self-pollinating. That means that the flowers are actually the sexual organ of the flowering plants. They pollinated themselves, or he could take one and pollinate it with another flower on the same plant that had the same genetics. And so he could self-pollinate and always get the same kind of flowers or plants in the next generation. And one of the reasons that he used peas were that peas were quick growing. So think about how many peas someone can grow in one generation. Each pod of peas has several peas in it, and each plant has several pods with lots of peas inside of each pod, and that can be one generation of peas. So he has lots and lots of data, which is really good for science. So let's talk about some terms. So genes are factors of inheritance passed from one, get ready for this, generation. You see the word gene in there? From one generation to generation. These are chemical factors that produce traits. So Mendel called these things factors. What we know now is that this is the section of DNA that codes for a certain protein. So if you're thinking back to the, I'm going to write this, think back to the last unit of DNA being transcribed and then translated into protein. So Mendel didn't know about the process of transcription and translation, but that's in fact what he was talking about. And so one example that you should know that we often talk about is hair color. Your hair color is based on a protein that is coded for by the DNA that you've inherited from your parents. The next word is trait. This is a genetic characteristic that varies between individuals. For example, widow's peak, being able to roll your tongue, or having attached or hanging earlobes. So, an allele is a different form, or different forms of a gene. For example, your hair color might be blonde, mine's black. We have the same genes for hair color, but we might have different alleles for that gene because our hair actually looks different. So we have different sections of DNA that code for different sequences of or orders of amino acids, which make for different proteins. So, for example, if our gene is hair color, then we have different alleles that code for blonde hair or brunette hair. And a hybrid is a combination of two or more forms of a trait. So an example that's not genetic but that might help you is that a car that is both gas and electrically powered. Okay, so a zygote, here's another word, zygote equals fertilized egg. That means the egg was fertilized by sperm. Okay, so a zygote is that first cell or first cells that are formed from a sperm and an egg coming together. So there are a few words that you need to know. Homozygous, which means, if you break that word down, homo means same, and zygous refers to this fertilized egg. So these are organisms that have two identical or the same alleles for a particular trait. So I hope this jogs your memory from middle school. We can sometimes know it as big T, or little t. These are two identical alleles. Now I should note that when we say big T or little t, we're talking about a section of DNA nucleotides, A's, T's, C's, and G's, that code for RNA, which code for an order of amino acids. So the order of amino acids that's coded from the big T might be slightly different than the little t. So by contrast to homozygous, heterozygous, hetero means different. So heterozygous means organisms that have two different alleles for the same trait. So big T and little t are two different alleles. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And then we've got to talk about dominant and recessive. And notice that in dominant, we write it in all caps, in all capital letters, and this is all lowercase. So the principle of dominance, basically, make sure I'm not, I'm going to go back. Okay, so this basically states that some alleles are dominant and others are recessive. We haven't really talked about what dominant and recessive mean, but here is, so a dominant allele is the form of the allele which can be expressed, which will be expressed, and the recessive one is the one that will be masked or hidden if, I'm going to fill this in, I want you to write this too, if any dominant alleles are present for that gene. And remember, recessive are written in lowercase. Okay? So, for example, excuse me. We have a few more words to do before we do some problems. So for genotype, we call this is the genetic makeup. And really this is the combo of the two alleles for each gene that an organism or one has. Okay? So for example, big T, big T, big T, little t, or little t, little t. So a phenotype are the physical characteristics. A good way to remember that is pheno is physical, and geno is genetic. Okay? So for example, it's what that actual code, the genotype, codes for. So let's say big T codes for tall. So we would use T to represent tall, but it actually, the organism looks tall. That's the phenotype. Okay? So here's an example. I mean, this is oversimplification. Or having green eyes, or being able to roll your tongue. All right, so the principle of segregation. I think you know what this word means. You learned about it in history class. This word means to separate. And this is really going to be important for Punnett squares, which we're getting ready to talk about. So when organisms reproduce, the alleles segregate from each other so that each gamete, this is a new word, gamete, I want you to write down a couple other things about gametes. They are sex cells, also known as, aka, also known as sperm or egg. Okay? These are the cells that will go on to make the next generation. So if a parent has one big T allele and one little t allele, they are heterozygous, remember? The offspring has a 50-50 chance of getting either a big T or a little t from that one parent. So we've got the big T, little t, and they separate. And here we go with Punnett squares. So we've got our crosses, but we've got some vocab that we need to talk about. So P, F1, and F2. So P are the parents. F1 is first filial, or the first generation of offspring. And F2 is the second filial, or the second generation of offspring. Alright. I see that I'm close to 15 minutes here, and I know the video is going to stop at 15 minutes, so I'm going to stop it here and go on to a second video, continuing the notes and some practice problems.